Indiana's questions in spring football, if they want to get back to the playoff, go beyond, but still include Fernando Mendoza.
You are Locked On College Football with Spencer McLaughlin, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day and your daily source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in this, the greatest sport on planet Earth. It's a spring check-in here. We've got a quarterback battle. We've got Washington trying to take a step forward in the Big Ten. Speaking of the Big Ten Conference, same conference for Indiana and Washington. That's the world we have now. So Jacob Goins of Locked On Hoosiers is here. Fernando Mendoza is a question for me, for Indiana, Jacob. Can he be as good as Curtis Rourke? I don't know that he can, but outside of the quarterback, which always matters, of course, what's the biggest question Curt Cignetti's got to answer right now?
Well, you didn't ask me, but I'll tell you anyway about Fernando Mendoza, and I don't think he has to be as good as Curtis Rourke does because I think there's more around him than what Curtis Rourke had. If you could have Curtis Rourke on this upcoming team, Indiana would be not only trying to get back to a playoff, but making a run in the college football playoff because of an improved offensive line, because of your two returning top receivers, and the question mark I have for Indiana is the running back room, believe it or not, because, man, I'm so not concerned with defense. It's unbelievable. You bring back two studs on the defensive line. You bring back your All-American linebacker, your All-American corner in D'Angelo Pons. You also bring in some transfer guys in the secondary that I think are going to be really good. Amarian Knighton is my favorite. It's the running back room that is just not, I guess, proven yet is the word, because you bring in BB from UAB. He's a transfer. You've got Roman Hemby, but you're just trying to figure out what the order is, right? And that's a lot of people right now in spring, but so many big time programs have the clear number one. I just don't know if the Hoosiers have that yet, but whatever that pecking order is, Spencer, the offensive line is going to be so much better than it was a year ago, which means Fernando Mendoza doesn't have to be a Heisman contender like Curtis Rourke was.
But if you look at this Indiana team, Jacob, there are still some losses. Nobody has the same roster year to year in college football. So do you have any concern? Clearly none on the defensive side of the ball. Just hear him and hear him now, folks. Jacob Goins of Locked On Hoosiers has no concerns about the defense. Remember that when they give up a 30 spot. That's not going to come back
and get me. Yeah.
No, it's not. I'm definitely not going to remember that. I definitely won't. And you don't get any takesy backsies because this show is recorded and I am the editor.
And it's posted. Not only is it recorded, it is posted for the world to see. No, I'm really not with the defense. And because of Brian Haynes, a defensive coordinator who was extended this past offseason, I'm really not. That could change depending on how spring practice goes. Injuries, of course, could play a major factor into that. Transfers out could play a major factor. I don't think so here, but you never know. But I'm really not concerned about the defense in 2025.
Is the offensive line that now has Pat Coogan, the former Notre Dame starting center, is that a unit you're at all watching this spring? Because I look at what Indiana did last year, and you know the most iconic play from the Hoosiers offense was the back shoulder fade. They ran it as well as anybody in all of college football. Well, in order to do that, you got to have some time to throw. So far, how do you assess how the front five are playing?
I mean, early it's tough to tell, but I'm keeping an eye on it because while you can go and get big-time transfer offensive linemen from Notre Dame, and you can get transfer offensive linemen from Ohio State, and you can get a transfer offensive lineman for Colorado, which Indiana did, Spencer, you know this, you can't just throw them all together and expect it to be flawless on week one. Heck, even in week 5 or week 6, it takes time for an offensive line to gel. With a new quarterback, with some new running backs. Yes, you have returning receivers. You've got a new tight end and Stays from Tennessee. Like, there are new names and new faces on this Indiana offense, and the biggest ones are on the offensive line. And so the question is, can Coach Shanahan, your offensive coordinator, with his assistants, get them all going in the same direction in the same time and in a timely manner? If you can have that locked down by the end of spring, that's a success to me. If we're having major question marks going into fall practice, still trying to figure out, okay, well, maybe if we move him from right guard to left guard, or if we make him a tackle and bring him inside, like if you're still having those conversations in Bloomington come August, then we may have a bigger issue.
What's the status of Curt Cignetti? And what I mean by that is
He's awesome. That's his status. Awesomeness.
Okay. Acceptable response. I'll rephrase, Your Honor. I will rephrase the question. He comes in and he's the story of the year in college football. He's taken the world by storm, trying to, he's got a big game with Ohio State that no one had on their radar before the year. That's all good and fun. But now it goes into year 2. Is there pressure on him? Are there big expectations? Is it all just, well, we're going to ride off the high of that playoff appearance for the next 2 years and he doesn't have to make it. No one's going to care. When you have such a radical shift in what the floor and ceiling of your program appear to be because of one head coach, how do you assess his, I don't want to say pressure level because he's, of course, locked up in Indiana for about as long as he could ever want to be, but how are fans viewing him? What's the story around Curt Cignetti as spring football gets underway?
Well, obviously, he's a celebrity. I mean, everybody loves him. Everybody is just like, oh my God, how did we find this guy? And the same, funny enough, for any possible basketball people here, the same, I guess, agency or whatever you want to call it, the search firm that got Curt Cignetti is also who just hired Darren DeVries, the new basketball coach. And so they're hoping for the same success on the hardwood. Pretty big shoes to fill. But with Curt Cignetti, you have this level of expectation because you set the bar so high in year 1. But most Indiana fans that I hear from, talk to, interact with, they understand year 1, maybe not an anomaly, but it was pretty awesome. And it's probably not going to happen again in year 2. Now, that does not mean that you can only win 5 games, miss a bowl game, and lose all your players to the transfer portal. That's not okay. I think it's just being competitive in the Big Ten. I think 8-9 wins, flirting with a Big Ten title, flirting with a college football playoff. Just give yourself a chance. And if you do that, you're going to be okay. And that's what you get when you win. But Curt Cignetti said they're not satisfied. They're not just going to kick their feet up on the desk and just cruise until he wants to retire. He believes that they can win championships right here in Bloomington, which is why they went and got guys out of the transfer portal. That's why you keep both of your coordinators on staff, which most teams say or can't say that going into 2025. He's not satisfied. And so while his job's not in jeopardy, they're not done, and they expect big things from inside this program for 2025 and beyond.
Fernando Mendoza compared to Curtis Rourke last year. Rourke had about 3,000 passing yards, 29 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. He missed 1 game. As spring ball gets underway, perceptions and opinions can change over time. But right now, you think Mendoza goes over or under those stats?
I mean, I think because of how good Curtis Rourke was, and we didn't know how good he was. Again, he transferred from Ohio, the MAC. I mean, he was lighting it up in Ohio, but we didn't know how that was going to transfer, and obviously it did. Mendoza's a little bit more of a proven commodity because he played Power 5 football. It's Cal, but it is still considered Power 4, I guess. And so you know a little bit about him. I think he goes under, and if I'm wrong, then fine. I'll happily be wrong. Curtis Rourke, without the injury, Spencer, he's sitting in New York for a Heisman ceremony. I just don't think that's the expectation for Mendoza. But as we started this segment, I will say it again. He doesn't have to be that. Just be good enough. Complete the passes, don't turn it over, and do your job. If you're Fernando Mendoza and you can do that, Indiana flirts with another college football playoff this season. I'm telling you right now.
You heard it here first or second or third, but hopefully first because you're making this your first listen. Jacob Goins, Locked On Hoosiers, go make that your second. We're going up to the Pacific Northwest, but staying in the Big Ten. Does Washington start to rise? Do they start to threaten, or are they staying flat? First, this episode brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment? It's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in. Your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you stop just managing your money and you start building wealth. All-in-one convenience is great in life, and it's great with Monarch as well. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year, monarchmoney.com. How does Washington take a step forward in the Big Ten in spring ball? Here to discuss that question, Roman Tomashoff of Locked On Huskies. So this is one of the few spring segments that I'm doing this week here on the show, Roman, where a quarterback controversy is not at the center of attention for a football team. Washington knows Damon Williams, the guy. He should be the guy. I think he can be incredibly good. But it's everything else that needs to kind of get to his level outside of maybe the wide receiving core and running back room. Let's start with the offensive line. Has Jedd Fisch and the staff addressed that enough for it to improve?
So I feel like there's a little bit of a debate between fans where you add 2 offensive linemen through the portal, right? You bring Garen Hatchett back from Oklahoma, where he spent the 2024 season, unfortunately got hurt early on, so he didn't necessarily get a chance to play much there. And you bring in Cover Willis from Kansas State, who is one of the better tackles in the portal, to play either left or right tackle. And you have some time to figure that out in spring ball, where I think that this coaching staff did do enough, where I look at adding, another year in the strength program for a guy like Paki Finau, a former 4-star recruit, redshirt freshman, that this coaching staff is really high on, that played really well in the Sun Bowl, along with getting a guy like Zach Henning, who's had a couple of years under his belt, played some tackle, played some guard, in to potentially compete for a starting job alongside Landon Hatchett, who's going to be taking over full-time at center, who didn't necessarily have any bit of an offseason last year because he was recovering from a torn ACL. So I think that with more depth along the offensive line and way more time for a lot of these younger guys to get ingrained in the strength and conditioning program and get up to speed at the college level, along with a full actual spring practice to work with, which this team did not have last year. Spencer, they had 7 healthy offensive linemen for spring ball, and 2 of those guys were walk-ons. There was not a lot going on in the trenches last year. So I think that it's going to take a step forward. We'll see how much, because a lot of these guys still are very, very unproven, but I think the talent is there, and I think the scheme could be there as well.
Well, the O-line, I think, gets kind of misconstrued sometimes when people or fans think about it, because typically you think, well, as long as you got four good ones, you can be fine. You could overcome one guy. And generally speaking, that's true. I think the best offensive lines have at least 6 guys who they feel are starting caliber, because then you have the ability to survive an injury and maybe flip this guy around from a positional standpoint. 6 or 7, I think, is the number that they want to, that most coaches, I think, would say they want to be at. And, the offensive linemen rotate a lot more than people realize. You think about receivers or running backs rotating in, or there are a lot of offensive line units across the country at the highest levels of college football that will routinely put one guy in for a series at guard and then put another guy in for the same reason they sub in this receiver or that receiver, just, to keep a guy fresh because of what the game plan is on the drive, whatever that reason may be. Somebody gets dinged up. So do you think Washington is going to be able to get to that sort of depth to where, they can build towards the offensive lines they had in the 22 and 23 seasons?
So that's a really great question, because when you look at that 23 season where they did win the Joe Moore Award, that started out as a really deep offensive line. And then you see Mateo Mele go down for the year, and Parker Brailsford slides in, and now he's an All-American center, right? You see Julius Buelow go down for a little bit of time, and Garen Hatchett slides in. So it's nice to have a guy like that back in the rotation. So I don't think they're necessarily there quite yet, because we haven't seen a lot of these guys where it's a lot of unproven redshirt freshmen. There's 1 or 2 true freshmen that they really like a lot. And I don't know how much these guys are going to play. I'm talking about Champ Talialia, John Mills, just throw the names out there so people can get familiar with them. I think that they've got the size, they have the talent up front to be able to do that. But a lot of it is younger guys. And we know that Jedd Fisch has no reservations about playing whoever is ready to see the field. We saw that from his time at Arizona, getting somebody like Jonas Avenaya on the field very, very quickly. So it's something that might take a little bit of time, but it's nice to have a full spring practice to be able to work things out. I think the talent is there, and now you've got a month to be able to say, hey, against this Ryan Walters front, which is going to create a lot of one-on-one matchups for these offensive linemen to really work and improve on over the course of 15 spring practices, I think we're going to see some improvement, but we're not really going to know until we get to September.
Looking elsewhere, as Washington continues along with spring practice, What's the biggest question in your mind? Because to me, the top question, hence why I started with it, is the offensive line. It was not anywhere close to where they needed to be. Now, Washington still got to a bowl game last year, so it wasn't, everything was a complete and utter disaster. But they end the year 6-7. Washington has higher aspirations than that. They feel like, and I think justifiably so, they're a program that can get to, or at least closer to, the top of the Big Ten than where they were at this past year. But the offensive line is question number one. What's primary question number two for this Huskies team?
It's the front seven. You saw last year, it was not very deep, where you saw some guys leave. There were a couple of injuries, and all of a sudden you couldn't stop the run in the back half of the season. And you played some really good teams, right? You played 3 college football playoff teams on the road in October and November. And as the season wore on and Javon Parker goes down with the Achilles, you see Zach Durfee lost for the season with turf toe. There are so many different things that just really diminish the depth up front. And Washington has gone out and addressed that. They bring in Simone Pepper from Utah, who I'm very, very high on. You get Ontario Thompson from Western Michigan, who's also got some Big Ten experience from his time at Iowa, and somebody who's familiar with just Jedd Fisch's program in Taitai Uyunglele from Arizona. So you bring in those guys on the defensive front. And then at linebacker, you also add 3 guys. You bring in Jacob Manu from Arizona, who we'll see what his season ends up looking like, where he's coming off a torn ACL. You bring in X-Ray Alexander from Central Florida, who was just a big physical body, who has really been productive over 2 seasons, one at Idaho and then one at Central Florida. And you also add Buda Alukta from Washington State, who was really productive there, had 3 interceptions and 3 forced fumbles, I want to say the number was off the top of my head, during the 2024 season at Washington State. So at a position where you certainly lost a lot, especially at linebacker, I think they've built up depth that you just didn't have last season, and you weren't able to rotate in fresh bodies. And, when you go to Iowa and you go to Indiana and you go to Penn State, especially, those are things that are not going to work out very well for you. So I think Jedd in year 2 has done a really good job of addressing needs that will really help you excel in the Big Ten. A lot of these guys are still unproven. You want to see how they fit in the scheme, but having a defensive coordinator in Ryan Walters, who understands life in the Big Ten and has lived it for the last 5 years at this point, I think that he knows what needs to happen. And I'm really curious to see what it's going to look like, because I think now you have a defensive line rotation that I don't want to say it's going to be elite by any stretch of the imagination, but if it's serviceable to somewhat above average, I think that this defensive line and this run defense can take a big step forward this season.
I think I know your answer to my next question, but I'm going to ask it anyway, because maybe I'm wrong. If you look at all the transfers Washington's brought in, and you just listed a bunch of them, and you had to highlight one who is the most important for Washington to succeed this year, and let's say go over their win total, which is 7.5 according to our friends at FanDuel, who would that one guy be?
So I have a feeling you think I'm going to say Takario Davis.
I do think that.
And I want to, but to keep you on your toes, I'm going to switch it up here a little bit. Because there's one guy who I just absolutely love talking about, because he's flown under the radar a little bit. And it's Northern Arizona transfer Alex McLaughlin, who's going to come in and he's going to play safety.
Great name. Great name.
He's got the best hair in the game too. For anybody who doesn't know what I'm talking about, just go look up his headshot.
Me too.
Awesome hair. Yeah. So I think that this is a guy who he was very, very productive at Northern Arizona. 167 tackles, 16 pass breakups, 6 interceptions over 2 seasons, and it's at the FCS level. But one thing that Ryan Walters has always had, especially during his time at Purdue, Spencer, as you know very well, is excellent safety play. He got that from Dylan Tiedemann during his time there. And I think that Alex McLaughlin, who, I just listed off the numbers, showed that he could be incredibly productive, is somebody who, if he is able to hang with the physicality at the FBS level, and when you watch the tape, I firmly believe that he can, is somebody who could really change this defense in a whole lot of different ways, where you want to walk him down. You want him to just play linebacker and help out and run support. He can do that. He's got the ability to play man coverage if you want him to. If he wants to drop back and have him play free safety over the top, he can do that as well. So he's a guy that I'm going to be watching very, very closely, because all the numbers are there and all the numbers show that this is somebody who could thrive in a Ryan Walters scheme that is very friendly to defensive backs.
I just like the name. I think that lines him up for success. Do I have the better hair? Does he have the better hair? I'll leave that for the comment section to decide. Roman Tomashoff, Locked On Huskies, great as always. Speaking of former Pac-12 schools, there's another quarterback battle brewing in the ACC. First, this episode brought to you by Nissan. We're all about the stats because numbers don't lie. And when it comes to the all-new Nissan Armada Pro 4X, the numbers are on an MVP level. With the ability to tow up to 8,500 pounds, it can quite literally carry the whole team, plus the gear, wherever you need to go. It's powered by a twin-turbo V6 engine, delivering the strength and performance to handle highways, back roads, and everything in between. And with room for up to 8 people, the Armada Pro 4X is built for big crews, big adventures, and even bigger memories. Whether you're exploring off-road trails or rolling up to the arena, the Armada Pro 4X brings power, versatility, and style wherever you go. Take your adventures to new heights in the all-new Nissan Armada Pro 4X. Learn more at nissanusa.com.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the bracket breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
Let's ask everybody's favorite age-old question. Can Cal pull themselves out of the middle or bottom out and make a change? Thomas Dunn, writeforcalifornia.com, is joining me here to discuss just that because there's a quarterback battle. Fernando Mendoza is off at Indiana, as I mentioned earlier in today's program. And so that leaves Cal with a question of who's going to start. So let's start right there, Thomas. This is a quarterback battle for an ACC program. It's not the only one, but it's an interesting one for whatever you make of it. So, who's going to win?
The answer is we don't know. That's good. That's bad. Everything in between. But the leading candidates so far, Devin Brown, the transfer from Ohio State, and the one, the only, Jaren Sagapolutele, the once Cal commit, almost signee, Oregon signee, in Oregon, now back to Cal, hasn't played a down of college football yet. And here we are. So they're fighting for the starting quarterback role. EJ Kamenong on the outside looking in as a third string guy. And I think the way I could characterize it right now, considering we've only had like 7 or 8 spring practices, is we don't know what we don't know. None of the lead candidates have played so many snaps in college football. So even when you have guys who could be performing in spring practice like they are right now, there's no substitute for game experience. So while I would give the slight edge to Devin Brown just in terms of a higher floor, again, there's just not a clear conclusion at this point that we can make. But those are the 3 leading candidates.
Yeah, and Devin Brown, it's probably falling upon a lot of ears listening to or watching the show for the first time, hearing that guy who was at Ohio State that almost maybe started for the Buckeyes once upon a time. He played in that bowl game against Missouri. That guy's he's playing for who? He's at a Power 4 school, competing to be the starter. But JKS, you mentioned his unique path. Cal, flip to Oregon, go there for a couple practices, and then go back to Cal, where I think he always kind of wanted to end up. And part of the reason is because he's got a better chance to start his freshman year at Cal than he did at Oregon, where you've got Dante Moore and Austin Novosad in there, and they brought in a 4-star quarterback in the class of 2025. But is there any major upside for the Bears to investing in JKS and looking at Devin Brown and saying, he's an inexperienced veteran. He doesn't have a whole host of starting experience from his time with the Buckeyes, but he was on the roster there. He's been in college football a couple of years. He's played a little bit. Is there anything to the Cal coaching staff, Justin Wilcox and company, looking around and going, hey, this is a 5-star quarterback. This is a guy we want to keep around. He's going to be the future of the program. Let's just roll him out and start.
In most cases, I would say yes, but not in this particular case. And this is just my own perspective and opinion on it. We're entering year 9 of the Justin Wilcox era. There is
already?
No more time to wait. Nope, there is no more time to wait. The fan base is tired of it. They're not going to sit here and wait as a quarterback, regardless of how good they are rated, sit there through a possible 4-8 tire fire. I mean, the program needs wins. It needs cornerstones. It needs an identity. And it needs to perform. There's no ifs, ands, or buts, and it doesn't matter who it is, what side of the ball, or how they get it done. If it's 3-2, if it's 50-49, win football games. If that's Devin Brown who's manning the ship at quarterback, it's Devin Brown. If that's JKS, it's JKS. But the coaching staff doesn't have the time and to figure that type of stuff out. and the fan base doesn't really have the time to wait. They may want JKS, but he may not be ready, and that's not a fault of him whatsoever. He'd be a true freshman getting thrown in the fire of Power 4 football, and you can only get so many good returns on that without, having your freshman moments or running into a type of defense you don't really see, and just the general, turning it over ever so often. So the Cal coaching staff does not have time to figure this out. They have to get it right, and it doesn't matter who it is.
I think the JKS dynamic is one of several in college football that fascinate me, because when you bring in a high-profile freshman like this, whether it's JKS at Cal, Bryce Underwood at Michigan, Juju Lewis at Colorado, you can find copious examples everywhere. Keelan Russell down at Alabama. The only downside, and I mean the only downside, when you bring in someone that's so highly recruited, that's got so much potential, is that the moment that you make him the backup, everyone's going to start to wonder in their head, is he supposed to be starting? Should he be on the field? The moment the guy in front of him starts to struggle, you're going to have people calling for this guy to get benched, and this guy should be starting. And why did they even why did they bring this guy? Why did they do that? So I think if Devin Brown emerges as Cal's starting quarterback here, Thomas, there has to be a level of production that has a certain floor for the Cal fan base, because as you mentioned, they're kind of restless. I think for them to keep the heat off Devin Brown, I think he's got to go out and have at least a winning record through the first half of the season.
Yeah, and I think the big thing is you don't want to placebo yourself into saying JKS 4 or 5 stars, depending on who you subscribe yourself to with recruiting rankings. Therefore, he has to start. He might just not be ready, and there's no reason. Well, there is some reason, I should say, to say this could be our cornerstone. We have to throw him out there regardless of what happens. But you don't want to flounder yourself, because this coaching staff is on the hot seat. And would I love JKS to take the bull by the horns and go establish himself as the day one starter and leave no doubt? Absolutely. Would I love it in the same vein if Devin Brown did the same thing? Absolutely. The fact of the matter is Cal needs to have someone who breaks out, someone who the coaching staff can get it right and continuously leave in the game in clutch situations. I'm looking at the Cal at Pitt game last year. I will not forget it when Justin took out Fernando on 3rd down with 2 minutes remaining. It's just a matter of doing those little things right, making sure the battle is clear, making sure the battle is won, and then making sure they go out and produce. Because you mentioned there could always be a look over your shoulder moment if Devin's named the starter, he doesn't perform. I think the same thing goes for JKS. You're the 5-star running out there day one. He threw 2 picks in the first half against Oregon State on the road. And everyone's saying, well, why is he starting? He's so raw, and the whole conga line down. So I think more than anything, get it right. Don't listen to the outside noise. Do your evaluations. If you get it wrong, well, I think we're going to be resetting Cal football come this time next year anyway.
So quarterback, of course, matters a great deal. We all know that. But you can't win on your own as quarterback. You got to have some semblance of support, some semblance of help. And just really quick, Thomas, for those who are uneducated on the Cal Bears coaching staff, who's the offensive coordinator again? Who's the OC for Justin Wilcox?
I think some Auburn fans, some Boise State fans, they might Arkansas State fans even. They might remember this name. Brian Harsin.
Brian Harsin is the offensive coordinator.
Yep. And alongside him, analyst Nick Rolovich. Lots of fan bases know these names, and I've heard so far it's been a lot more, we'll say, direct line of communication, a lot more cerebral about this is what we expect, this is what we want, and this is what we're going to get. And look, it's one thing to say that. It's another thing to go out and have a product that actually completes that. So we'll just have to wait and see, because spring practice only tells you so much. But that's the vibe and the gist of, all right, it's all business, because it has to be. There's no second chances when it comes to missing out on production this type of season with this type of schedule.
Lots of turnover with every college football roster every year now. If Cal is going to, let's say, overachieve or have what you define as a successful season to get in that 7 to 9 win range, give me one transfer that has to pop for the Bears.
Spencer, you're going to hate me for this cop-out answer. You really are. But it's a group. It's the offensive line.
That is a cop-out answer. That is a cop-out answer.
I'll let you do it, though. Yeah, it's the offensive line transfers, and that's the only correct answer if you're a Cal fan. For those who have watched Bears games last year, how many times did you look up and you saw Fernando Mendoza or Chandler Rogers getting sacked within 3 seconds?
Often.
There is no level of success that's attainable if the offensive line's not going to block in the run game for Jaden Ott or Javian Thomas, or if they're not going to block for whoever the quarterback is come day one. So all of the offensive line transfers, there are the 5 of them that really stick out as, all right, some of these guys got to pop. Tyson Ruffins from Nevada, Leon Bell, Mississippi State, Lamar Robinson from Georgia State, Lawan Owens, who came over with offensive line coach Famika Ane from New Mexico, and Jordan Moko from Charlotte. So this group, with some of these returning players, they got to get coached up well, and they got to gel well, because the Cal's ceiling is so limited if the offensive line does not produce. And I trust Famika Ane to get it done, because he built a road grader of an offensive line, especially in the run game at New Mexico. But it's one thing for me to talk about it. It's one thing for me to project about it. They have to do it. There's no time to waste. But that's the group that matters. That's the group of transfers that matters. And really, as much as everyone will focus on the quarterback battle, and rightfully so, none of this matters until the offensive line blocks.
You never think about Cal until they come and beat your team, and that can include Cal fans themselves, because sometimes Cal is beating Cal. Thomas Dunn, right for California.com. Great as always. Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time, and until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.